In the last couple episodes, I have been working on getting all of the essentials down for survival Minecraft. We got fully enchanted netherite armor, we got enchanted elytra, and we have an unlimited source of fireworks just last episode. And today we are continuing on that train with food. Now, food is something that is very easy. My general go-to for food is actually cooked pork chop, which is extremely easy to farm. But I'm not actually going to be doing that this time, because the way you normally farm cooked pork chop is you make a hoglin farm up on the nether roof and you just kill them and get cooked pork chop. However, while that farm is incredibly easy and takes just about 10 minutes to make, and it's the easiest thing literally ever, I don't want to do that because the create mod adds in a couple new food options, and I'd much rather make some create contraption that gets us a cool new food than just do a 10-minute long farm, and also I can't really make a video off of that. So what foods does the create mod add in? Well, there's 4 of them, and to show them off I have hopped into a creative testing world and put them all out with their stats. But first, let's look at cooked pork chop. Gives you 8 hunger and 12.8 saturation. Like I said, this is my go-to food, and I really would like to have something that is either better than this or equal to this, because if it's not, honestly, I might just make a cooked pork chop farm because they're really easy and it's a really good food source. So the first option is sweet rolls. This is 6 hunger and 8.6 saturation, which is not very good when you compare the two, but it does kind of make sense. The crafting recipe for this is bread and milk, so it's quite easy, and it's definitely not a good enough option. Next one is similarly bad. It has 6 hunger, and the wiki didn't list the saturation, but I did some tests, and the saturation is for sure lower than cooked pork chop, so it's another no-go, because like I said, I'd really like it to be better than that. So next option is chocolate glazed sweet berries. I think that's not at all what they're called, but you know, I tried. Let's see, what are you? Chocolate glazed berries. Okay, and these have 7 hunger and 9.2 saturation, which is better than chocolate, but still not nearly as good as cooked pork chop. So yeah, but luckily the last option is our saving grace, 8 hunger and 12.8 saturation. If those numbers look familiar, that's because they are. It has the exact same stats as cooked pork chop, only it is a beautifully complex crafting recipe for these things, so this is our option. But before we get into how we're going to make honeyed apples, I need to address a question that at least someone is going to think, if not comment, because why not golden carrots? Golden carrots are generally accepted as the best food source in the game, and that is technically correct. They have 6 hunger here, and I believe 14 point something saturation down here, which is why they're so good. They last like forever once you eat them. But the thing is, they only have 6 hunger, and that is the deal breaker for me, because if we look down here, once you get down to 3 hunger bars, you can't sprint anymore, and that's generally the point at which I eat in survival Minecraft. And cooked pork chop, I only have to eat twice before I get back to full, whereas golden carrots I have to eat 3 times, and that might seem really trivial, and probably that time is made up for with how long golden carrots last because of saturation, but that time is less noticeable to me as opposed to eating time, which is very noticeable. So that's my reasoning for using cooked pork chop instead of them, even though it's maybe kind of stupid. But that aside, let's go over how you make these things. Shockingly enough, honeyed apples are made with honey and apples. All you have to do is put an apple under a spout like that and provide that spout with honey, and boom, you have a honeyed apple. It is a super simple crafting recipe that takes like 2 seconds. But that's kind of not the hard part. The bad part is the resources. Apples are very easy. I already have a farm for them, but honey, on the other hand, is a little bit more difficult. This is a fully optimized create honey farm. Well, probably not fully optimized, but it's pretty darn good because you can't really do too many improvements with a honey farm. There's a hive with a pump coming out of it into a tank. As soon as these bees that have plenty of flowers to look at, and there's 3 extra bees in that hive, by the way, it's not just this dude, it will pump the honey from the hive into the tank. And as you can see, it takes a while, because for honey to be produced, a bee has to first come out, pollinate themselves like this guy has, which is just sitting on a flower for a bit, then go into the hive, and when the bee comes back out, the honey level goes up by 1. If we look in the F3 menu, you can see this honey level is 0, and there are 5 levels before we get a bottle of honey, which is 1 honeyed apple. So it's really slow, and the only real way to make this really much better is to just make it bigger. If I have 2 hives, that's twice the speed. If I have 100 hives, that's 100 times the speed. So I kind of just need to have a ton of hives working for this thing, and then we will actually get a decent amount of honey. But that's going to be a kind of big build, and I need a place to put all of that. Now, the obvious option for where to put this thing is just underground somewhere here at my base. I mean, there's plenty of space just like down here. I could easily fit 100+ beehives, and that would get me the honey I need. But there's a little bit of an issue with that. I need honey, but I also need apples. And like I said earlier, I do have an apple farm, but it's not at my base. It is way over here by my village. So if I wanted to put the honey farm over at the base, I would have to build a new apple farm over there, which presents a couple of issues. Firstly, I just already have one, so it feels a little redundant. And secondly, the infrastructure to support an apple farm is kind of a lot. This is my apple farm, or it's really a tree farm, but it produces apples too for the golden apple production system that's all around here. And this thing is running off of another farm that's in this area, which is this farm, which is gigantic. This is a bone meal farm because apple farms need to grow trees to get apples, so you need bone meal to do it. So either I would have to cart the bone meal over there or build a whole new bone meal farm. And you saw how big that thing is. I'm not doing that again. So I'm just going to put the entire food system here because we already have a lot of the infrastructure for all of the apples, and we just need to build the honey stuff, which doesn't really rely on any specific thing, so there's no real reason to put it in any specific place. So over here is where it's going to go. And since we're doing the village, I kind of want to have higher standards for making things look nice because everything here is kind of like interconnected with paths, and I've at least tried a little bit with aesthetics. Nothing is like completely just hidden underground, so we're going to keep that theme going, even though it's not really part of the village project, it's kind of its own thing. I want to still keep with that like consistency, so I'm going to put it somewhere on a path to keep it as actually part of the build. And I also really want to try and make it look nice, especially since bees go super well with just like pretty nature, which is one of my favorite things to build, like this pumpkin patch or, you know, the random flower garden that's over here. So I want to make a giant apiary that has a capacity for up to 400 bees is the number I'm currently going with, although that will probably go down as we get further in because that is a ridiculous amount of bees, but that would be 100 hives-ish, so we'll do somewhere in that range. But for now, I want to just plan out an apiary that size because it's gonna be kinda large, and I don't think I can just freestyle this thing. The first part of this build is going to be an actual building. I want to have a little hut that has room for the output of the farm as well as the actual honeyed apple production chain, so like all of the spouts and stuff, and this building should fit thematically with the rest of these, like the same style, but I really want to try and make it look better because most of these houses are extremely cookie cutter. I mean, to be fair, the vanilla village in the first place is pretty cookie cutter, but I think I've actually done it a disjustice with a lot of these, so I really want to try and improve that. And then the second part is going to be the actual apiary itself, so where all the bees are free to roam about and pollinate flowers and of course make us honey. And this is the hard part, because as much as I would love to just put a ton of flowers around and let the bees loose, I think some of them would like get lost or just leave. I'm not 100% on that, but I'm pretty sure it's what would happen. So I want to try and contain them at least to some degree. Actually, I just looked at the wiki and it seems like they won't. It pretty much just says that bees are quite good at returning to their homes. So instead of making some enclosure, the bees are just going to roam free and it will be nice and cute, hopefully. But it does mean that I'm going to not have extra bees, as in more bees than there are hives, because I had that in the little test demo I showed. But if I do that, then some bees will think, oh, there's no home for me here. I'm just going to wander aimlessly until I can't possibly find my way back. So we're going to try and avoid that. But I think the bees should be good as long as there are enough hives available. So now all there is to do is get building, and I think I'm going to start with the little village hut because it's going to be a lot harder to do that than it is to just make a field of flowers. So I'm going to start with the hard stuff in hopes that I still have a ton of motivation for the project by the time I finish it, because like I said, I really want this building to be distinct while still fitting with the villager style, which is really hard to do because the villager style is very boring. But I'm going to do my best and we'll see how it turns out. So without further ado, let's jump into a time lapse and get this building built. Well, I didn't really fit it stylistically with the rest of the village, but since that style is kind of blocky, undetailed buildings, which is what most of these are, I'm kind of fine with that because this one looks super good, and I did end up keeping some of the aspects of a vanilla village like cobblestone and the incredible amount of oak logs everywhere, plus this like white terracotta plaster stuff. We got the oak panels. Everything is a little bit familiar, if not be way too detailed to be a vanilla village, as in it's covered in signs, which is my version of detailing. I think it looks good personally, but I am really happy with how this building turns out. The roof is a little weak just because it's all kind of the same and it's touching a little bit too much here for my liking. But other than that, I think the building did turn out quite well. It's only missing a couple things. Firstly, this outside area is kind of bland and completely empty. I imagine that this is like the person who works in the quote-unquote orchard and also the apiary that does not exist yet, so I imagine they would have to have some outside work area to do something, but I don't know what that something would be, so I kind of left it empty. And the other one is a lot more glaring, and that is that the interior does not exist, but this one I have a lot better justification for. A lot of the stuff that's going to go in here, like the output of the honey farm and probably also the production of honeyed apples, is stuff I haven't built yet. I mean, obviously, because there's no interior, but it's stuff that's going to be part of other systems. And to avoid a planning nightmare where I end up not having room for everything, I want to wait to do the interior until I have both of those things in, because that way there will for sure be room for everything and it will all feel nice and organized. So on the topic of doing things that have to go in the interior, I think the next thing to do is the honey farm, which I have to do a lot of planning for because it's going to be generally this quite large area, and like I said earlier, I'm not going to put like a glass dome on it or anything. It's just going to be mostly open, and like the bees will be free to fly away if they want to, I guess. But I don't really know any more specifics other than that, and the main thing that I want to figure out before I start building is how many hives I want to use, because the number I've been rolling with currently is 100, and that's a lot, and also it's a number that I just completely made up out of nowhere, so it doesn't really have anything going for it, other than it would definitely make enough honey. But I think that's too much, mostly because 100 is just like way bigger of a number than I think it is, because I'm like, oh, it's just that's just like a 10 by 10 thing of beehives, but 10 blocks is like a lot. Like, let's see, 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9, that would be like this to there and that tall. That's a lot of hives, and that's definitely way more than I can like fit in this space and also make it look pretty, so I think I have to go lower than that, but I want to actually make an informed decision as opposed to just pulling another number out of thin air. And by an informed decision, I mean I googled how long it takes for one hive to produce one honey, and apparently that time is about 2 minutes, which seems really short to me, but the only time I've actually thought about that time is when I am intently watching a beehive waiting for it to produce honey, and a watched pot never boils, so 2 minutes is probably pretty accurate, despite the fact that it feels like an hour when I'm actually waiting for it to happen. So now the question becomes, how often do I want this thing to produce honey? And the answer to that question is once every 3.6 seconds. And that might seem really arbitrary to you, and that's because it kind of is, but it translates to roughly 1,000 times an hour, which is just kind of a really nice number and might seem over the top. But if you think about it, I'm not going to be around this farm all the time. I mean, this is not where my base is, so it's not going to be constantly producing. It's probably only going to be producing when I am actively looking for food. And if I'm actively looking for food, I don't want to have to wait that long. And if I AFK overnight, which is like roughly 8 hours theoretically, assuming I actually sleep well, then that will give me plenty of food for a while. So I think that's the number I'm going to go with. And I haven't figured out how many beehives that's going to be yet, but I'm going to go do that now. That math took me far too long to do, but it turns out to about 33.333 repeating beehives, so I'm just going to round up to about 35 beehives, and that should get us a little bit more than 1,000 honey per hour, which should be plenty. So I'm going to go come up with a design that has around 35 beehives in this general area, and then of course we'll all hook them up to a piping system so we can actually get the honey to one place. I suppose I wouldn't call it a design as much as just like a large network of paths with a bunch of little random details, like tiny little weird fences that do nothing and lampposts. I also put some benches in, but I think it turned out really well. I have just a ton of flowers everywhere for the bees, but it's missing one very, very important thing, which is beehives. You'll notice there's a bunch of weird little floating things like this. These are all going to eventually be beehives, but I don't have any beehives right now because beehives require wax to craft, and wax requires bees, which I don't have. So before I can actually finish this project and get onto the automation part, which will be just essentially tubes under all of the hives like that, I need to actually go find a beehive. And luckily, I already have one that I found while I was kind of gathering resources for that project, but I don't know if it has any bees in it. Because the thing is, I didn't see any bees go into it, which means there is absolutely no guarantee. It's in here, this bee nest. If I do that and close all of the doors, I don't think it has any in it. And theoretically, if it did, and if I were to, I don't know, get honeycomb from it, the bees would get mad and come out and try and kill me, which they're not doing. So I'm pretty sure this hive is empty, which means I have to go find a different one. But the lack of bees in that nest is also not a very promising sign for my the bees won't just leave theory, because that nest was in these deforested birch trees where I just took leaves from it to make the birch trees in my little enclosure, and that means I was close to them pretty often because this used to be my tree farming area, which would mean maybe they left while I was near them, which is not a good sign. But I'm just gonna kind of ignore that and hope that my bees don't leave because there will be too many hives and flowers near them, and worst case comes to worst, we just have to like cover it in glass or something. You know, this might just be me rationalizing my own dumb decisions, but that beehive already had a full 5 levels of honey in it, which would mean the bees don't have any incentive to go back to the hive, but my beehives will be constantly emptied of honey by the tubes underneath them. So maybe we're good and they won't leave because they'll want to continue pollinating and getting honey for their hives. And so that's the theory I'm going with. And finding a beehive is way harder than I thought it would be, but I found a bee, which hopefully means there's a beehive nearby, and once this little guy gets some pollen, he should head back home and to like deposit that pollen. There's another, oh, there's 3 bees here. There's the hive. Okay, but I can't break this yet, because if I break this, all the bees will just get mad at me and try and kill me, but if we wait until nighttime, they will all go into the hive, and then I will be able to pick it up with all 3 bees inside, and we can get breeding. Well, it's nighttime, so as soon as I stop holding these flowers, the bees should go right into their hive, and it is now mine. Total bee location. Kind of love that achievement. I don't really know why. It's just one of my favorites because it's so goofy, I guess. But either way, that is our 3 bees, and from there we should be able to breed up as many bees as we need to fill all of the hives. But first I have to go place this one down and harvest it for honeycomb a couple times so I can actually make the hives for the bees to fill. Boom, boom, that should be a fully functional little bee harvesting system, and because there's a campfire beneath them, if I harvest this honey, they don't get mad at me, and hopefully the bees will actually leave, assuming I got the right hive, because I had 2 in my inventory, so it's very possible that I mixed them up. I think I mixed them up. No bees are coming out. 1 minute. Never mind, I broke the campfire, and now they are happy to come out, so I'm pretty sure the campfire just prevents them from coming out, although who knows. I'll leave it off for now and just put it down when I need to harvest them, because it's kind of unsafe for the bees anyway. If I put down the campfire, then chances are they're just gonna run into it and kill themselves, although I do have one idea to prevent that, which is if I put a trap door above the campfire, so like that kind of thing. I don't think the bees can fit in there. It's close. I'm honestly not sure, but that might stop them from hurting themselves in it. So we're just going to go with that. If they start to injure themselves, I can just break the campfire. It's no big problem. Oh, there is our first little bee baby. He's so cute. Bees are such a weird mob because the babies sometimes look like the exact same size as the parents, depending on your perspective. But either way, just have to keep doing that for quite a while and continue to place down more hives. I got that one from, just some honeycomb I had laying around. And now we just do this for like an hour. There we go. The last beehive is now in. We're still quite short on bees and there's no real way to count them, but based on how many flowers I've used in breeding them, I started with about 4 stacks. I think I have around like 45-ish, so that's the number I'm going for, but I'd like to consume all of these rose bushes before I actually stop, because that should get me somewhere in the range that I actually want. However, if I just sit here and breed them for another while, I'm worried that they'll fill all their hives with honey, and then some of them will leave, because that seems to happen, although I'm not 100% sure. But like, hives like this are full, and I don't really want to go around and harvest them like that, because I don't really need the honeycomb. So before I finish breeding all of the bees, I'm going to go ahead and get the system in to actually auto-harvest these hives for honey. But unfortunately, because I've talked so much in this episode, we're kind of out of time, so I'm gonna have to leave that bit until the next one. But next time we will fully automate this farm, get the whole Unneed-Happle, sure, that we're rolling with it. Unneed-Happle farm in here should be great. And honestly, this episode was amazing. I really enjoyed just like building some cute little buildings, making this little garden. It turned out super well, so I really liked it. I hope you guys did too. But for now, I will see you in the next one.